To everybody, thank you very, very much as always. And thank you to New College Berkeley for making these events possible. Usually a book, if it's written decently, will tell you something good about one or two topics. And if it's written really, really well, it'll tell you about secondary topics. And if it's a profoundly good book, and I don't think Jeffrey will mind me saying that because the praise is due, the book will give a philosophy of life. And this book totally is that kind of book. It gives a philosophy of life. Now, I'll mention that I know Jeffrey a little bit already because I had the pleasure of talking with him and his wife, Anne, particularly around their friendship with Lucy Shaw. So I already know that he is someone he's worth listening to. When I first picked the book up, I noticed the resplendent accolades of praise given to him. And I thought, okay, this is going to be a good book. And then I admit I looked for the movies that I could recognize. And so I saw Pinocchio and The Muppet Show, Watership Down, and I thought, okay, probably he's going to say these are not just for children. And then I saw The Dead Poets Society and Blade Runner, which is cool, and Wings of Desire, which is very, very cool. And so I thought, this is going to be really good. But I didn't read the chapter titles. And I think probably that was fortunate because what I expected was a book of film reviews. And that's in there. But what I got instead was a book about life. So, for instance, Jeffrey writes deeply about the real meaning of success. He says, success is not a goal to be obtained. It's a way of living from moment to moment in fearlessness and faith. He writes about creativity. He said, this is a cool quote, I am not playing God, but I suspect I might be playing with God when I am engaged in the art of making. He writes about the importance and reality of the interconnectedness of us, how we flourish when we see ourselves as part of a whole and not merely as isolated individuals. He reflects on truth-telling, that truth often simply cannot be just overtly stated, but must be told slant through story, metaphor, imagination. Of course, that includes movies. He writes about the sacramental nature of the mundane, ordinary things, which I really, really appreciate. And I think it's important. He also talks about play and why play is not just for children, and about learning to think not just with our heads, but with our hearts. And Jeffrey, you made marriage look so cool. I really appreciated that. It was really, really nice. But in general, your book, it makes a person really appreciate life. And despite the fact that life can be difficult and it can be filled with challenges, it's still something that can be cherished. And you helped me see life better through that. So I thank you very, very much for doing that. And also, as Christians, so you write about art, creativity, and imagination, amongst other things. And Christians talk some about that, but I don't think enough. And so your book adds to that. You know, it can be a light within Christianity about the importance of those things. So this was a really, really, really lovely book. Also the binding and the pages. I like the pages. It's nice pages. You can write very nice on the edge. It's a lovely, lovely book.
Thank you so much. Wow.
In terms of housekeeping, as usual, this event is recorded. We'll send out links to those who are on the list. If you send questions to Matthew's team at any time, you can send them as soon as you hear something interesting. Send me a question. Jeffrey's good at questions. And if you don't say otherwise, I'll say your name along with it. And I asked to do that because it makes it easier to do the publishing of the YouTube stuff later. Got the questions, and we'll start the questions around 6 o'clock. And so other than thanks to Jeffrey for this beautiful book and your presence being with us, to start us off, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and, of course, why you wrote this book?
Wow. Well, thank you, first of all, for all of that. I wish I could take credit for the beauty of the binding and the design. That's all to Broadleaf Books. One of the reasons I wanted to work with them is they make beautiful books. So I was delighted when I saw this cover design and shared it with some friends. And the first words that came out of their mouths were, That's very Wes Anderson-y, and I think some of us here will know what that means. As a big fan of Wes Anderson, the filmmaker, and since there's a chapter in this book on Moonrise Kingdom and what that movie means to me, and it's kind of the centerpiece of the book, it felt appropriate. So I'm so glad the that made an impression on you. I thank the cover artist in the book. I'd have to look that up. It's been a while since I've said the name out loud, so I won't risk that here. But yeah, thanks for that. A little bit about me. I grew up in Portland, Oregon. I have a brother named Jason, who some of you may be familiar with if you've ever listened to an a cappella group called Rescue out of Portland. They put out a whole lot of CDs and did shows around the country, and so they have a lot of fans still out there. That's my younger brother. My dad and mom were teachers first. They attended Seattle Pacific University, as I would eventually do, and now I teach there. And my dad was very involved in the early years of Portland Christian Schools, which is still quite an institution there in Portland. In 1989, I would head to Seattle for college at Seattle Pacific as an English Lit major. And when I left college, when I graduated from college, I really missed, above all, the experience of gathering with a group around a text and pulling it apart and figuring out how it was working, how it was having these mysterious effects on me. Or even better, I learned to crave insightful but rigorous criticism of my own writing. And I really loved the creative writing workshops we would have at SPU. There was only one creative writing class, but there was a literary arts journal, and I got involved with groups there. So when I graduated, I went looking for ways to keep that in my life, because not only was it helping me become a better writer and a better reader, I wrote film and music reviews for the school paper. I wanted to be a better critic. I really needed to find outlets for that. And in the 90s, the internet was starting to open up. I wrote some guest film reviews for a church website, for a local radio station website, and then eventually figured out how to do my own where I wouldn't have quite the constraints. And it was around 2001 that I got a call from Christianity Today saying, a lot of Christian media seems to think that Christian film reviews should be basically a way of cautioning parents about the harmful potential of film. There was very little artistic analysis. There was close attention to a concise checklist of concerns. I had loved being a literature student. I had loved, reading Heart of Darkness or reading Emily Dickinson, and hearing all kinds of different perspectives on it. And what was missing in these reviews was curiosity. What was missing was an appetite for beauty and any kind of eloquence in writing about that. What was missing was the personal element of how our own experiences deeply influence how we receive a work of art. And so we need to be in community in order to give voice to what we see going on in there, and then to learn from others. That's why a great work of art any decent work of art cannot be reduced to paraphrase. There is always more going on there for us to discover at different points in our lives and in different relationships. So Christianity Today asked me, would you write about film the way you're writing about film for us? Because we think movies deserve better than what we're seeing in Christian dialogue. I think we've kind of lost that. And I couldn't believe what was happening. Christianity Today was the only magazine I remember my father ever subscribing to. And so that for that to come out of the blue without me ever even imagining that I might pursue something like that was pretty life-changing. But it was also life-changing in that once I stepped up onto that platform, the angry mail bag got about 100 times larger. And if I reviewed a movie, I would get a rush of angry mail from professing Christians telling me that if I liked a Martin Scorsese movie, or if I found anything worth praising in a Harry Potter movie, or if I liked Shrek, or if I did or didn't like Titanic, then I needed to accept Jesus as my personal savior. which was disorienting, since I have a vivid memory of doing that when I was 5 years old, and grew up the son of a Bible teacher, and grew up in Christian education. So I needed a way to respond to those messages. And as we all know now, I mean, that was 2001. As we all know now, if somebody comes after you on social media, they probably aren't interested in hearing a thoughtful response. They probably aren't even going to see what you send back. They have thrown their stones and they have left. But I was trying. I didn't know this yet. So I spent hours, like, painstakingly trying to graciously respond and maybe strike up a conversation with the ultimate hope that, I mean, what would happen if this became a friendship out of this, even though it started badly. And the emails got longer and longer and longer until I realized I needed to tell a life story. So in 2007, my first nonfiction book, Through a Screen Darkly, was published. And that was written in a frame of mind that was very much, I wanted to justify the ways of art to Christians, to let them know that it was because of art that my faith had grown. And it was because of art that I loved reading the Bible. And it was because of art that I was learning how to love my neighbors. And so that book was very much the long email in response. And what I found when that book came out was, well, a whole lot more angry mail from people who didn't appear to have read it, but also invitations from Christians all over the world who in their churches felt lonely with their love of the arts. Christians who couldn't find people to talk seriously about a movie or an album or a book after church. And so the internet gave these lonely souls like me a network, a growing network. And now, I mean, I look at some of the people I met there in 2001, 2002, and so many of them have become close friends over the internet. And so many of them are prominent film critics and writers now. I met Alyssa Wilkinson there, and she's now one of the top 2 critics at the New York Times. I met Stephen Gradanis there, probably my favorite film critic in religious circles. So that's a book from 2007. From those adventures, from those conversations, from this being a path that I didn't realize was going to lead me back to school and then to teaching film classes and teaching creative writing classes, I have long sort of regretted that book never got me to a place where I was done answering the confrontations, to a place where I could just celebrate the beauty, the joy, the images, the characters, the transcendent moments that spoke to me beyond the capacity of my own vocabulary, and that increased my faith. So I decided to do it again, but this time it would not be written back to angry emailers. This time I was going to revisit myself at 5 years old, where I first encountered Pinocchio, and then the many adventures of Winnie the Pooh, and then the Black Stallion, eventually My Neighbor Totoro and Moonrise Kingdom, Watership Down, which I know a lot of people feel traumatized by having seen that as a kid, but it's one of my favorite novels, and I think the movie is actually quite remarkable since every frame is hand painted, and it's very faithful to the spirit of that book. But then, so you move chronologically in this book. Each chapter takes a movie or 2, and I sort of zigzag between telling stories about my childhood or telling stories about high school or college, and then doing some deep dive criticism on the film that was responsible for shaping my imagination, shaping my beliefs during that time in ways that deeply influenced the decisions I was making. And that's where we get to the part that you mentioned earlier, Matthew. There is a chapter near the end on marriage and on my evolving understanding of true love from childhood to adulthood, and how certain movies have influenced everything from the early morning routine here at the house for me and my wife, Anne, who is a poet, and that becomes an important part of the chapter, all the way to helping me heal from some pretty devastating events in earlier relationships. with the hope of reconciliation. So then it kind of turns a corner towards looking forward, towards the kinds of challenges that are new to me, but that I know are going to preoccupy me more and more as I get older. And so that, of course, brings us to movies like, well, the current political scene. I talk about Do the Right Thing, for example, and the importance of attending to film from other cultures so I can learn to love my neighbor better, all the way to the transcendent Terrence Malick film, The Tree of Life. It might be a bit predictable to end a book like this there, but it's such a magnificent film, such an ambitious one. And then as kind of an epilogue, well, I go to one of the most theological and challenging films of all time, Marcel the Shell with Shoes On, which kind of brings us full circle back to Pinocchio and puppets and play. You'll see that play is a very important thread throughout the book. So that was a very long answer to your first question, but it's been a very circuitous journey. And I love that I can pick this one up and it doesn't feel like I'm going back out on the battlefield. It feels like a chance to celebrate that I am as enthusiastic about the life and teachings of Jesus now as I have ever been because of movies and how they continue to quietly affirm those things, often in languages beyond the evangelical vocabulary I grew up with. So I know I skipped a lot of things there, but I'm gonna stop there so that we can move on, because I'm looking forward to asking people here about the movies that changed them.
What a fantastic idea that movies can actually influence your spirituality. Um, when I saw the book, so one of the first lines I saw was, movie watching can be a spiritual discipline. And I think I mentioned to you in one of the emails, I just about, spewed the coffee out of my mouth, because I come from a family where that is not. Work is good, movies are entertainment, and fiction is meant for entertainment. And of course, I've grown up some now. But that idea of movies just being as entertainment is something that obviously you deal a lot with. Can you talk more, if you were going to talk to, let's say, a Christian who does have that erroneous, simplistic idea, what would you want to tell them about that?
Well, I mean, for me, it began as entertainment because I was I wouldn't say I was a lonely kid. I didn't sit around feeling sorry for myself, but books and music and movies um, woke something up in me that I, when that wasn't happening, I was bored. And so I think I don't want to disrespect the value of healthy entertainment. But let me point to something that happened a few years ago as to kind of set you up for why I'm concerned about the term entertainment. A prominent Christian filmmaker, and by that I mean a filmmaker in the Christian movie industry, as opposed to someone out making movies who is a Christian. I think there's a difference there. I think you'd be surprised how many filmmakers out there are just being kind of quiet about their Christian faith because they want to be effective artists in the world. Um, but this one is known as a Christian filmmaker, and he produced this sort of motivational speech that was shown at some industry events, where he announced what the 3 priorities for a Christian filmmaker should be. And then there were these big slides so that we couldn't miss them. The first one was, we want to see our worldview on screen. Okay. Well, I mean, an artist, inevitably, if they're doing good work, something of their worldview is going to be reflected in what they do. But this felt very evangelical in the aggressive sense of the word. We want to put our worldview up there. We're not interested in these other worldviews. The second one was this: we don't want to offend anyone. That was priority number 2. Do not offend anyone. And I'm thinking about how often the art that's changed my life offended me at some point, with something unfamiliar, or by showing me part of the world that I'd rather not look at or think about. And then I started thinking about Shakespeare, which was made a very high priority for me in my Christian schools, or the Bible for that matter. How many stories in Scripture could you say, have nothing likely to offend in them. So he was calling for a very sanitized kind of work. And it just makes me tired to think about how rigorously you would have to strive to make sure you're not offending anybody, because we could think of some obvious things that offend people, but some people are offended by a certain kind of car driven by a character, or by a certain kind of fashion, or a certain kind of um, attitude, a certain kind of anger. There's so many things that could be offensive. If we lead with being afraid of offending people, or afraid ourselves of being offended, we drastically narrow the kind of storytelling we can offer. And I'm not convinced that we can tell very good stories at all. The third one was, we just want to be entertained. So get our worldview up there, don't offend anybody, and just be entertained. And I suddenly realized that the film classes I teach and my own approach when I go to the movies, like I've done several times just in the last 6 or 7 days, none of those concerns are on my mind. I don't need to see my worldview on the big screen because I'm following my curiosity. I want to go out there and experience somebody else's creative expression. I believe we're all made in the image of God, and whenever we are making, we are indulging that aspect of ourselves, whether we believe in God or not. And as C.S. Lewis would say so emphatically, we are all using the materials and the experiences that God has given us. And in arranging them, we cannot help but share things through which God is still speaking. However, we may have enhanced that and enabled that, or limited that with our weaknesses. But I want to learn to love the world. So I want to see the creative expressions of my neighbors from all over the world. And if there is a people group that I hear being mistreated, or I hear being misrepresented, or I hear being talked about the way the Pharisees would talk about the people Jesus hung out with, I want to go look at the art that comes from those people. I have spent a lot of time in the last couple of years looking at movies coming out of Iran right now, because I want to know what stories the storytellers are telling. And it has brought the day-to-day life of the people there to me in ways that now when I see a news headline, I have a whole new world of perspective and experience about who might be affected by whatever's happening in that headline. And it doesn't just stop with like somewhere on the other side of the planet. It starts with, factions of the community right here that I live in, or that I see on campus every day at Seattle Pacific. So I want to see new things and be challenged by things. I don't want to be offended, but I know there's a big difference between exposing evil and condoning it. You've got to be able to deal with the mess of the world in your art making. Artists are usually trying to work something out that they can't find the answers for in their everyday language. They have to step out of their vocabulary and do something aesthetically, do something with light and shadow and color and sound, in order to arrive at an understanding of something that's beyond the grasp of our feeble vocabulary. So now, the Bible says a lot about right and wrong, and the stories in the Bible are full of right and wrong. We see right and wrong on display all the time. But the Bible has other binaries as well. There's right and wrong, but there's also good and evil. You can do the right thing for evil purposes. You can do the wrong thing out of love. So that complicates it. And there are scriptures about how, some by a process of maturity have learned to move beyond mere vegetables to the meat of things, the milk and the meat of things, right? And then there's another one, wisdom and folly. And wisdom is emphasized throughout the scriptures. And I think about the example of Jesus when people would throw the laws at him. How dare you do this? And he's like, have you looked at what's happening here in front of us? The law is important, but the law was created to help us. And if when you see that people are hurting, you are bound by law in a way that keeps you from loving, then you have lost sight of the purpose of the law. And that's where wisdom comes in, being able to interpret particular situations. So when I go to the movies, I want to be surprised. I want to step into a world that's a little different than I've experienced before. Do I want to be entertained? I mean, of course, but it can go so much farther than that. And so often the movies that have meant the most to me are ones that I didn't really know what to think about the first time I saw them, but they stayed on my mind. Some kind of question formed, like the grain of sand in the oyster, right? Or in the clamshell. I'm a Pacific Northwesterner. I should know this. Um, and so those three priorities just look like this is what has been holding the Christian movie industry back. We're so worried about offending, probably not them, but probably our own communities, families, congregations. We're so eager to get our vision out there that we've forgotten about listening. Through all of this, more and more, I have come to think that maybe the Great Commission is about a whole lot more than us just going and preaching the gospel. I have a feeling we were sent because God wanted us to discover what else God was already doing out there and how much we have to learn from those we have already prejudged as lacking. Because that is what movies have done for me. The ones that have moved my faith the most have probably been films that did not, well, definitely been films that did not come out of the Christian movie industry, but probably have been films that were not explicitly religious at all.
That was a really, really, really great sermon in itself. That was really, really good. Um, Connected to that, you talk in your book about the importance of film being, and this is true of fiction as well. And there's been studies that have been coming out more recently about this, that fiction and film can increase our empathy towards others. And I think that's true. Could you speak more about that?
I mean, yeah, I mean, that connects to what I was saying about curiosity. I grew up hearing about loving your neighbor in church all the time. And then I would go home and watch Sesame Street and be very curious about why so many of the human characters on Sesame Street looked different than the people in my church, looked different than the people in my community. And I don't want to narrow this just down to matters of race, but it was profoundly puzzling to me that the first Black Americans I met were Gordon and, oh, I just blanked on her name. Maybe somebody here knows it. Gordon and, anyway. And I had no idea, of course, at the time that Sesame Street was designed by Jim Henson very specifically to appeal to inner city Black children, especially in New York. That was the mission, even though it may not have been the spoken mission. But it made me care about those children and wonder where they were in my neighborhood. Fast forward to when I'm graduating from high school, I see Do the Right Thing on the big screen. I'm getting a little braver about going to these R-rated movies that I've heard throughout my childhood are things that good Christians would never get anywhere close to. And what I see there is not a movie about Black Americans raging against white Americans. What I see is a community that is fractured every which way. There is racial prejudice, of course, but there is also ageism. There is also misogyny and sexism. This community is broken every which way. And as soon as you are empathizing with one character about being mistreated by this character, then you see them turn around and mistreat somebody else. And you start stepping back from this picture of New York, realizing that it's about to blow up, not just because of the obvious, although that is probably the prevalent concern of the film. If you haven't seen Do the Right Thing recently, go watch it and marvel at the fact that it came out in 1989, because it looks like it was made last year. It seems like it was made about things that are going on right now. But it showed me, first of all, just how insulated I had been, what a bubble I'd been growing up in. This is everyday life for many, if not most Americans. And it's another planet for me. And so my relationship with that film over the years has been one of slowly learning to brace myself for the things that are abrasive, the things that are offensive, the things that are upsetting in that film, to really come to care for and love those characters and the plights they're in, even in spite of, maybe because of their weaknesses, because they seem so human to me. They seem so three-dimensional to me, so different than the kinds of characters I had grown up with in Christian storytelling, which was almost always good guys and bad guys. So there's a film that I share with my students a lot that I really love, made in Mali by a French African filmmaker named Abdourahmane Sissoko, and it's called Timbuktu. And it is about what happened in Timbuktu in the last 20 years when Islamic extremists moved into the city, imposed Sharia law, and started just arresting people right and left for not having the pant legs pulled up far enough or down far enough, for playing music of any kind, for women not wearing gloves, all kinds of things that showed you that these men did not understand their own scriptures, had come up with a long list of rules that would enable them to exercise control over their community, to jail those that got in their way when they wanted something, to make even married women available to them when they wanted them. And I realized, watching this the first time, this is the first movie I've ever seen where all of the characters are Muslim. But like Do the Right Thing, it's fractured every which way. There are so many different perspectives on the Quran, so many different perspectives on their own scriptures, their own culture, their own tradition, their own history. And I thought, I have always just sort of been given this one-note description of what Muslims are like in my Christian bubble. And that has kept me from understanding the world they wake up in, the history they have to reckon with, the ways they struggle with their own scriptures. And what I found going through it, and I want to be very careful here because this is not an all religions are the same thing. But what I marveled at was this character of the imam in the mosque who, when the extremists come in with their guns, tells them this is a house of prayer, this is not a place for guns, and begins to recite from his own scriptures things that sound exactly like Jesus, things that just resonated with things I had been taught. They pull him aside and say, "We are performing jihad." And he says, "Do you know what you're talking about?" Jihad, boy, that's a word I have learned a lot about since September 11th, 2001. Jihad in our scriptures is about a moral reckoning that you first perform in your own mind and heart. And when you are finished, and he says that with kind of a wink, then you can turn your attention to others. And of course, I'm hearing the scripture about don't pick at the stick in somebody else's eye until you've dealt with the log in your own. I'm hearing so many familiar teachings. And I'm realizing that while these two religions are clearly not the same, we have so much common ground that we could be talking about. And I'm starting to really love this leader in this mosque and how deeply he loves his people and how he is trying gently, knowing that to respond with force is not going to help anything. He's responding gently, lovingly, with wisdom, trying to draw their attention to the foolishness that they are making a spectacle of themselves with in this community. And I love showing this to classrooms of students, many of whom grew up evangelical like me, many of whom are still going to claim that term like I will, in very, very carefully. That word has become almost meaningless in the way it's being used today. But the discussion so quickly, without any prompting from me, goes to, I felt like I was watching the church I grew up in. I felt like I was watching the arguments I'm hearing Christians having today. And there's always one or two who are like, I just realized that I never had any idea what life might be like in a place like that, what family life might be like in a place like that, and just how narrowly those people are represented to us here by our own media and within our own churches. So I want to see their worldview on the screen. There is so much that offends me about those extremists, and one of the loving family men who makes a bad decision with a gun about halfway through the film. And yet, by the end, I'm not just entertained, I am moved and transformed by the plight of those people as they flee the extremists and realize that many of them might be coming to our borders begging for help as the murderers close in behind them. And I think about what prevents the communities I'm in from going off this cliff into this kind of violence and chaos, and how much longer is that going to be the case? So your question was about empathy. To be able to put yourself imaginatively in the experience of someone very different than yourself. My students use the word relatable a lot. And forgive me if I'm trying to break the habit of saying my students, because the more I teach, the more I realize I just happen to be the one who has the job of starting the conversation, and I come away learning something. So we're all students in there, but they use the word relatable a lot. They'll watch a film that confuses them and they'll say, I didn't find that relatable. I'm like, well, is that the highest end of art, to show you something that's familiar to you? Did you connect with anything? And then we start having a class discussion, and somebody over here did connect with this character. Somebody over here was impressed with what the camera was doing over here. Someone over here knows something about the film composer. Someone catches a literary reference. And pretty soon, the students who walked out of our screening looking discouraged and why did I have to sit through that, at the end of the quarter are writing about that film like it was the most important one they saw in the class, and how it has awakened them to things that they are now curious about, and how it has helped them better discern who to trust and who to distrust when it comes to testimonies about what's going on in the world. So, as the great Frederick Buechner said, if we are to love our neighbor, we must first see our neighbors with our imaginations as well as our eyes. That is to say, like artists, we must be able to enter their experience of things. And he says, love is the frame in which we should see them. And those words have stuck with me. If you were to love your neighbor, you must first see your neighbor, and you must be willing to receive from and learn from your neighbors, which goes against all of the training I had when it came to evangelism in my Christian schools growing up. I feel like the church in some places has come a long way with that. I know that mission trips are treated very differently now in some Christian organizations than they were when I was growing up, with this sense that we're going to go over there and fix everything for them and show them that we've got everything right, and that's going to change them, to moving with a healthy dose of curiosity and entering into a dialogue where all might be changed. And I think that's what art can do without being particularly confrontational. There's so many hot topics that I can't have a conversation with certain family members or certain people in my church or certain people in my classroom. But if I show them a movie that raises a question and our attention is on that, then the questions come up in a non-contentious context and we can make more progress there.
Mm-hmm. This is the ability of a film, at least for people who are watching it with an open mind, open heart, get past the sleeping dragons, right? Like you can get past so many things that otherwise wouldn't have been able to, it wouldn't go.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just agreeing with you.
Something else that you did in the book that I really, really appreciate, because it's not done all that often, is, and depending on the background for Christians, I don't speak for all, because just like with all kinds of other groups, there's a whole plurality of different Christians within that group. But I think fair to say a lot have a binary between the secular and the sacred. And there's reasons for that. But I really liked what you did in the book. Can you talk more to us about, the importance of maybe not having that dichotomous thinking?
I mean, it's sort of threaded through the whole book. I'm trying to think if there's a particular moment that gives me a vocabulary for that. I mean, growing up, what was sacred was what was constructed with the vocabulary of evangelical Christians, specifically Protestant evangelical Christians that I grew up with. And so I was missing out on relationships with, conversations with, curiosity about, understanding of Catholicism, Eastern Orthodoxy, etc. So it was more complicated than just sacred and secular. There was the sacred in that this is what we have judged as okay, and we're not budging on any of these issues. You have to check our checklist in order for us to feel like we can take a chance and look at the art you're making. But then even within Christian circles, it was so much more complicated than that. Take, for example, Hayao Miyazaki's My Neighbor Totoro. I didn't see this until I was out of college. I believe it first screened in the very late 80s and then showed up in America on VHS in the 90s. And then Pixar and Disney started, the artists there started admitting that Miyazaki had been tremendously influential for them. And they actually started repackaging, dubbing, and bringing the Miyazaki movies to America. Now, right away, Christian media was loaded with warnings that this is not Christian storytelling. This is not sacred storytelling. This is pagan storytelling. This is, do not be deceived by the references to the Shinto religion. Much like the warnings that I heard when I was 7 and 10, when the Star Wars movies started coming out, and never got to see The Empire Strikes Back in the theater because I was strongly warned that this secular movie was going to try to dupe me into leaving Christianity for Hinduism or Buddhism. That dangerous Yoda character. And I was allowed to read the stories because somehow that was safer. And I would just think, this is so full of echoes of the gospel. It just kind of made my head spin. So when I finally started watching the Miyazaki movies, what struck me was just what beautiful stories these are for children, and that Miyazaki gets children in a way that I have never seen from Disney movies. There is something about the way children move and speak and play and pause, even just if they go completely motionless and they are focusing on a small detail. They're looking at a crack in the wall because they believe there's something there. That tells me Miyazaki, the artist and the storyteller, has watched children so closely and so lovingly that he can't help but just celebrate the way they think, the way they move, the way they do things. And in that attention, he not only makes children around me who are different than me sacred to me, because I see the beauty in them, I see the curiosity in them, I see the spirit, I see all the things that Jesus teaches proving true in their choices and the consequences of those choices. But I also am inspired by the devotion to the craft that is necessary to bring those characters to life. And that is something that was given very little attention in my Christian education. It was all about delivering the message. So to me, I started realizing that there is a sacredness that I sense the glory of God in the children of the Miyazaki movies, in Miyazaki's devotion to not having nature just be a backdrop for a scene, but nature is alive and mysterious and strange. And you start to realize that what nature is doing in a scene in a Miyazaki film may as well be treated as another character altogether. That there is purpose in everything he puts on the screen. So even the way the trees move are important. Even the way Lauren Wilford, who graduated from Seattle Pacific more than 10 years ago now, wrote a beautiful essay about My Neighbor Totoro that just celebrates his attention to every blade of grass. That's where you see the love Miyazaki is pouring into his work. And that's why you come away having a spiritual experience with this little children's story. And she wrote with such love and such specificity about that film that if you buy My Neighbor Totoro on Blu-ray now, it comes with her essay in a special book. So I started realizing that what was sacred was not so much what was made with a vocabulary I recognized and approved of, but what was sacred, what was was what was full of love, or was what was inspired that curiosity and that love in me. And so that should be everything, right? It's so ironic to me. The first verse I learned that I was taught to memorize as a child was, "For God so loved the world." And then so much of my Christian conditioning was on fear the world, remove yourself from the world, stay away from the world, don't let the world influence you, don't look. Miyazaki loves the world, and thus he arrives at a place of truth. He arrives at a place of beauty. And while he would probably resist any Christian vocabulary going on to that, if you know anything about translation, you know that different vocabularies can communicate the same truths. Sometimes different vocabularies are necessary so we can express even more about the same truths. Sometimes I wonder if this is what Jesus was on about when he said, "I have sheep in other pastures." There are people in other languages and other vocabularies who get this. Or what C.S. Lewis was on about when the worshiper of Tash came before Aslan, and Aslan said, "When you were worshiping Tash, you were actually worshiping me." The great Christian mystic Simone Weil said that Jesus wants you to prefer the truth to him. Probably the most controversial line that I recite in a classroom, based on the expressions I see when I say that. Jesus wants you to prefer the truth to him. I put that in the book. I can't remember exactly what chapter it's in. But the idea is this, and there's more to her quote. I'll get to that. Jesus knows if you pursue the truth, you're going to end up at God. God's never going to put you in a place where you have to choose between the truth and God. So maybe if the truth of something asks you to step outside of the vocabulary you're familiar with and comfortable with, maybe God is drawing you toward a deeper understanding of God's self. And maybe you're going to look back and realize that the Jesus you believed in was a very limited portrait. So the rest of the quote, Jesus wants you to prefer the truth to him because, and I'm botching this, so I'll paraphrase. When we devote ourselves to the pursuit of the truth, we will inevitably fall into Jesus' arms. So what these movies have been doing for me is asking me to listen to my neighbors with their different languages and different experiences and different traditions. When they do their work with love and truthfulness, they draw me beyond the sphere of my own experience into a bigger world that their contagious love for gets to me, and I start loving too. And I start looking back and realizing I haven't left Jesus at all. This actually resonates with so much of what Jesus said. I've been thinking a lot lately about the story of the Transfiguration. Two of the apostles go with Jesus. They're on the mountainside, and suddenly they see Jesus talking to Moses and Elijah. And imagine how that would have blown their minds. And they're saying, "We've got to build something here right now. This is the place. We've never seen anything like this happening before. This is where Jesus is revealed as the Messiah. Let's build here, and then people will come to us." And Jesus is like, "Nope, we're moving on." Because Jesus knows that to follow Christ is to keep going. There's always more to be discovered. And as soon as we decide we've arrived, as soon as we decide we have the vocabulary for it, as soon as we decide that our particular Christian tradition has everything we need in it, as soon as we decide that the Bible is all we need, because the Bible itself keeps pointing us outward. The heavens declare the glory of God. Day by day pours forth speech. The night skies show forth his handiwork. Like, don't tell me that the Bible is all I need when the Bible is constantly insisting I need to go love the world, because that's where the relationship continues and where we learn there's always more, like any healthy relationship should be. So Totoro taught me that. And the more I paid attention to My Neighbor Totoro, just the one Miyazaki children's movie, the more I started noticing things I hadn't seen the first 12 times I saw it. That when the magical creature Totoro blesses the children with this eruption of this enormous tree in their backyard, that image has always disturbed me. It happens at night. You think maybe the children are dreaming, but this big fluffy character comes out of the woods and unleashes this tree from the ground and it's filling the sky and blotting out the moon. And I was always deeply disturbed by that. And then one night in class, one of my students said, "Why is the house that this family lives in filled with soot?" This is set in Japan in the early 1950s. Huh. The possible answers to this question are interesting. Why might a Japanese house be filled with soot in the early 1950s? And then I start reading a little bit about Miyazaki, and I find out that actually he was 3 years old when his family fled a city that was firebombed in World War II. And then they fled another city, and then they fled another city. Some of his most formative foundational memories are of escaping firebombed cities where these pillars of cloud were filling the sky. So here is a story about children who are worried that their mother is dying. She's in a clinic not far away, but they are traumatized by this and they are looking for ways to creatively cope. And here this benevolent spirit of the forest comes out, takes a gift they have given him and gives back to them some seeds. The gift they gave him, by the way, was an umbrella, just to shield him from the rain. They take the seeds that Totoro gives them, they plant them, they fall asleep, and now we have this strange dream sequence where Totoro comes out, proceeds around the garden the way the clergy proceed around the altar in my church on Sunday morning. And suddenly this tree erupts from the ground, and I realize, I know why this disturbs me so much. It looks like an atomic mushroom cloud. Imagine what this must feel like to Japanese moviegoers, or to him, when what he shows as a gift given back to the children from Totoro is the antithesis of a destructive atomic mushroom cloud. It is a tree that provides shelter and life and is full of this benevolence, including Totoro himself. And then I realize I look at it again, he's given them an umbrella. He's given them a cosmic umbrella. This is a story about umbrellas, which is why the chapter in the book is called The Umbrellas of Miyazaki. If you follow the umbrellas in the story, what a curious little detail to follow. What you get is a story of generosity. Somebody gives them an umbrella, they give somebody else an umbrella, they worry about dad who needs an umbrella, they go down there's Totoro, they give him an umbrella. And we're left with mom still in the hospital. What kind of children's movie is going to do this to us? But we've been shown that in a creative, open curiosity to the world around you, you might receive the gifts you need in order to creatively make your way through these hard times. And Totoro blesses them with the greatest umbrella of all, this vision that from the tiniest seed of creativity can grow something that protects a whole family, a whole community, and that answers what else we are capable of. I'm trying to remember where we started with this question. The sacredness of Miyazaki. I would never claim he's a Christian filmmaker, but he prefers the truth. He prefers beauty. He makes art out of love, extravagant love. And I just sense Aslan on the edge of the frame. All right, I'm going to rest my voice for a minute. Forgive me. You're asking me these questions that, for 40 years I've been wrestling with these things, and I'm still trying to figure a lot of this out. What makes me sad is how many people from the Christian communities I grew up with I cannot share these movies with. What makes me sad is how many of them have told me, or have told family members, or maybe they are family members, have said that I left the faith a long time ago. That's that breaks my heart. When I go for my coffee, then I'm going to shut up for a minute.
Mm-hmm. You're like a missionary, and a missionary is someone.
How ironic!
But I mean, well, that can have baggage to it, right? Especially in colonial times, et cetera. Missionary equals bad. But I think a true missionary, assuming that their motives are good, is someone who actually can be fluent in both languages. And how often is that the case that missionaries are not effective because they can't actually speak the language, because they don't take the time, they don't take the love, they don't take the care to actually see through the other's eyes, to learn that language at great, I don't think for you it was great annoyance, but because you love it, but spending the time to immerse yourself in that thing so that you can talk to those people. That was, I mean, you're not a missionary in the sense of you're not converting other people, but you're converting me though. And I think you're converting, I mean, anybody else who's watching this, I mean, after this, I mean, how could a person, it would be a very, wait, I have a quote. I have a quote. It was from, this is from Frank Burch Brown. I came across this earlier today. He said, "It seems fair to surmise that someone lacking in imagination and artistic sensitivity, like the person who is morally numb and imperceptive, presents a special challenge to the divine." And so what you are doing, at least to me, and I'm not an expert in this, I mean, I'm kind of more fresh into it. This is showing the beauty of God's creation in the everything, and that if we look, we can truly see God in so many more places than where we could expect. And that is really, really cool. That's a gift. That's a beautiful thing.
I don't go into a movie with all of this on my mind. I go into a movie because I want to take my mind off of other things. And so it's when I come out the other side and I'm like, there's something there. And then eventually, you know, you wrestle with it and something erupts. And then I guess I am overcome with this sense of, my mother tells me that when we would go to the Oregon coast when I was a little kid, I had this habit. My mom and dad would walk along the edge of the water and I would run ahead into the mist or around a dune or something. And then I would come back and tell them what they were about to see. So there's something in me that's just like, I can't wait to share with you what I'm seeing here. But now in these classrooms, I can't wait to share with you what my students are discovering, that I somehow haven't seen in 25 visits to this particular film. Maybe that's what being a missionary should be, you know, where it's not this practical goal you have to convert someone. Maybe by living in enthusiastic curiosity, the things you'll discover will inspire praise. And that draws people, I think, whether that's what you intended or not. I rarely get through a conversation like this without thinking of Madeline L'Engle, who wrote, "We do not draw people to Christ by telling them how wrong they are and how right we are." Wow, well, there goes so much of the program I grew up with. We do not draw people to Christ by telling them how wrong they are and how right we are, but by showing them a light that is so lovely that they long with all their hearts to know the source of it. I don't know that I would be able to talk about these things if I had not read Madeline L'Engle's Walking on Water, which is the most life-changing book for me on the matter of faith and art. And if more of you go buy that book than mine, I'll be happy. But the company that comes with Madeline L'Engle connects you to Lucy Shaw, her best friend, who became a very dear friend of Anne and I for many, many years. We were just at her memorial service, and Matthew, that's how you and I got to talking, was about celebrating the life of Lucy Shaw. Lucy Shaw was very close to Eugene Peterson, who eventually became a mentor of mine, also a Seattle Pacific University grad. This book is dedicated to him because he said, I mean, Eugene Peterson, who wrote that profound paraphrase of the Bible, The Message, and who wrote so many great books of theology, says that he, without question, learned more about God and his faith was more greatly influenced by artists than by theologians. It's also dedicated to the memory of the MFA in Creative Writing program at SPU. Matthew, you and I have talked about how Christian culture is in a different place than it was in the 80s. And maybe it's not as unusual to hear some of these ideas. Maybe it doesn't seem as urgent. But when I look around at institutions of Christian learning, when they need to save money, they cut the arts. We had a flourishing MFA in Creative Writing program at Seattle Pacific. Great writers were coming out of that. I could hardly keep up with writing about them when I worked in marketing for SPU because they were doing such incredible work. But communities of artists draw attention from people who are concerned about difference. And I don't know what went on behind closed doors, but I know that program was flourishing and they cut it. They have now also closed the theater program, the journalism program, the philosophy program, the history program to a great extent. I'm very worried about where we are right now. Why is the imagination the thing that's getting cut? Well, if you go back to that, we want our worldview represented and we don't want to be offended, then yeah, you're not going to last long in the arts. But the imagination is the most fundamental stamp of the image of God that we have. We were made to be makers in his image. And when you start paving over those gardens, you do a great disservice, to say the least, to the experience of faith and to the testimony of Jesus in the world. A Bible so full of poetry, how are we going to read it if we aren't studying how poetry works? I'll stop there. That's my rant for the day.
Thank you very, very, very much for all this, and also for the note of heavy that we should all seriously think about. And this is where I think for all of us who are engaged in some type of church leadership, how important it is. I mean, I still believe that the church, that pastors have an influence, not as much as they used to, but they still do, for us to go to those pastors and sweetly and nicely and firmly tell them about the importance of the art for our own selves, and we be missionaries to them so that they can have, because they still have influences with, you know, with the organizers of these institutions. That is really, really important. I think, man, that's really important. And thank you, Jeffrey, for saying that. And obviously you're in that, so you can speak to it more than most. But the way that you spoke to it, especially because of what you were just saying, I mean, all these things about the importance of art, of imagination, of creativity, of the connection to empathy, the connection to spirituality, how to be a better Christian, how to be a better human. And those things are connected to the arts, creativity, imagination. And if we are not helping to facilitate those things do better, woe art we. For questions, we are, thank you, everybody. And so I'll just start with the first question that came in. Okay. You talked about the importance of welcoming and seeking being surprised in fiction and film, and the spiritual practice of listening to what God is already doing in the world. Are there any particular practices you could suggest for fostering this type of participation in literature?
In literature? Well, let me start by just speaking to Christian educators, if there are any here. Although I'm sure there are many who have family members in Christian education, either as students or faculty. A lot of these places have very strict and discriminatory policies that limit who we are going to be in communion with there. And one of the ways I respond to that when it comes to literature specifically, in order that we might practice loving our neighbors, I stack the syllabus with things that have been written by the people that we are not going to get to hear from on our campus. In my creative writing classes, I won't get into a whole lot of specifics, but we read work by professing Christians, but we also read work by people who have walked away from the church in apathy or disgust. We hear, I mean, whether it comes to race or LGBTQ matters or whatever, I try to bring a community of imaginations to the classroom that we might miss otherwise. Now, Seattle Pacific has very diverse classrooms. Once upon a time, I mean, when I was an undergrad there, most of the students in the room had come from evangelical backgrounds. That's not the case anymore. Um, so we have very rich, sometimes very challenging conversations. But I'm always trying to make sure that any particular people group who have had the door slammed in their face have a chance to testify in the texts that are on the table in our classroom. So, for example, one of the stories that I love to teach in my creative writing classes is um, a short story that won an award for fiction written by veterans from the U.S. military. And this is by a writer I met in the SPU MFA and creative writing program. And she was in charge of a company at the front lines of the Iraq War, and writes about what it was like to be the only woman in that company, writes about what it was like to be a woman and gay in that company and in charge of the men. And her story is not explicitly religious. It is a story about power. It is a story about the things she had to suffer in order to do just the fundamentals of her job. It was about the daily disrespect and insults and hatred she had to suffer in order to just do her job well and serve the country she loves. And then there's a big scene near the end where she has to confront a terrifying figure from the other side of the conflict, who has basically a woman who is a slave in his office. And there's this unspoken connection between the U.S. soldier and this woman as she tries to negotiate with this fearsome character. I would come to find out that this all came from her own experience. This was not fiction. And I was not surprised, because the attention to detail, the respect for that woman imprisoned in that office, the respect for the other soldiers, and the long-suffering respect for the other soldiers, given what they were going through and given the way they treated her. I love teaching this story, first of all, because it's a masterpiece of craft. She writes in this very minimalistic way. She does not bring emotion to the language. And as a result, we are experiencing emotions. We want her to shout. We want her to lash out. We want her to get angry with some of this. We want her to be able to grieve. But because it's so informational, so matter of fact, which is the way she had to be in her job, we have this profound emotional experience and come away changed, caring about her outside the context of all of these slings and arrows that usually accompany such conversations in our communities. So for me, that is a way in the context of literature, and this works just as well for movies. But you have to be curious. You have to read a lot and be unimpressed with a lot of things to find these treasures out there that just keep surprising you. And so that story has been very meaningful in the classrooms. And I've often heard from students afterwards going, "Thank you for including that. There's something I haven't told you." And now we have a new dimension of our conversation. Now we know each other a little better. Now we can share experiences and grieve with one another and support one another and point each other to other things. That's where the real change is going to happen, not in me standing up front and assigning things and then telling people what I think about it. Does that address the question well?
I think so. Okay. Another from Taylor. Thank you for this. I love the way you describe how movies that aren't explicitly coming from a Christian worldview communicates beauty and truth, and how they help us put ourselves in the imaginative shoes of others. But sometimes it feels like movies as entertainment can be treated as just another thing we consume. Is there anything about the way you approach movies that resists this?
Yes, because in our consumer culture, we consume. So we go to a movie and then we go do something else, or we part ways. In my classroom, I insist that we watch the entire movie together. I have not many teachers probably have the resources and opportunity for this. I'm very grateful for this. In my film class on Monday nights, we get together at 6 o'clock and we watch an entire film on a big screen with a good sound system. And that means that none of them are going back to their rooms and watching the movie on a phone or an iPad, where I learned many of them were adjusting the speed of the film in order to get through it faster. As someone who loves movies, you have not seen one battle after another if you've watched it on double speed. You have not seen Babette's Feast if you were doing something else while it was playing over here. So we do that. I ask for some first impressions just on a strip of paper so that they get some of their initial feelings and thoughts down. And I say, what is one question you would hope to hear this class discuss on Wednesday when we come back? I gather those, I organize those. We come back on Wednesday night. Now we have 2 hours to start a conversation. And I share the questions they've asked with the class. I get them exchanging ideas. We revisit particular scenes. I pour far too much time into making these extravagant slideshows. So if there's a particular image somebody mentions, I can just throw that back up on the screen so that we can study it on its own and learn to appreciate composition and color and things like that more than we might if it's flying by. But this is the missing piece. It's like we don't chew our food in this country. And you're not going to get much out of things, and you might just choke. But that second night is so important. And that is why, again, one of my favorite things about my film and faith class is that at the end of the term, I ask them, what are the movies that you're going to want to go back to? What are the movies that have made the strongest impression on you? And so often the ones they name are the ones they complained about on the way out of the classroom on Monday night. Because they're saying, I just didn't get that. Why? Geez, that was unpleasant. And now, because they've heard all these different perspectives and it starts opening up and they start understanding, they start investigating the why of some of the things that got strong reactions out of them. And so often I learn things too. Some films I really loved, I've had to kind of give up on for classrooms because I've realized that some students are hearing things and receiving things that I didn't realize they would, and that are actually rather disrespectful. And so I've had to pull back some of those. If you're interested in that, email me. I'll be glad to give you some examples. But
okay, another. Your earlier comment about the difference between good and evil and right and wrong, and the wisdom we need to grow into sometimes. Sorry, I botched that. Your earlier comment about the difference between good and evil and right and wrong and the wisdom we need to grow into sometimes navigate between the binaries reminded me of Graham Greene's The Power and the Glory, which to me deals with just this so beautifully. Can you tell us more about any films that help you think more deeply about this?
Yes. Well, I mentioned Babette's Feast, and it's a film that's so beloved in Christian circles. It's kind of a cliche to bring it up in a conversation like this. I keep waiting for the year when I'm going to show that to a class and feel like we have now aged out of this movie. The undergrads just don't appreciate this. And for a while, they're like, this is corny. This is slow. When is anything going to happen? And so often by the end of the term, again, that's the movie they say was their favorite of the 15 movie marathon we go through. Babette's Feast starts in a religious community that has very strict definitions of right and wrong and good and evil. And yet, to their credit, too often this movie is boiled down into those stupid puritanical Christians. No, they are wise and gracious, and they open their door to a refugee from Paris. And they bring her into their community and they give her a place to sleep and they give her a job. And they don't know that this is one of the greatest chefs in the world. And they start trying to teach her how to make the meals that they live on, which right away the class is just miserable looking at what these people eat. But she loves this community and serves them for what they have done for her. And they learn to love her. Some in the classroom notice that she is wearing a cross with a Jesus on it. She's Catholic. These are Protestants. When, I don't want to spoil anything, when later in the movie she gets an opportunity to thank them more formally, more properly, she blesses them with a huge French gourmet banquet, Babette's Feast. And they are terrified as they watch her preparing this because she's using ingredients they have not allowed themselves. She is making things they've never seen before. She is using wine, which some of us will laugh about, but I bet some of you, like me, can remember growing up in a family where you would have had that reaction. So they determine that they are just going to soldier on and ask God to guard their hearts and minds, and they're going to get through this night and pray that the devil does not seize this opportunity. And as they start experiencing the beauty of the meal, as they start tasting things they've never dreamed of before, this is probably what inspired my first fantasy novel, by the way, which is about finding colors you've never seen before. They start realizing how narrow their view of the world has been. And not only do they enjoy the meal, but something about that experience with beauty unlocks things in them, and they start confessing to one another. They start reconciling with one another. Relationships are healed. And there are profound acts of mercy that rival anything else I've ever seen in art, including the fact that there is a soldier at the table who sits there praising and praising and praising the general who, in the French uprising, killed Babette's family. And yet she is sending him extra portions of things. There are even really wonderful little nuances about the things she's serving him that might actually have kind of a bit of an elbow to the ribs about what you and people like you have done to my life and my world. But ultimately, this extravagant mercy to even her enemies, you start to realize how petty so much of what we bicker about in Christian community really is. These things that we believe if somebody checks this box, then I can now judge them, or they have judged themselves. And there is now no opportunity for relationship because we have written them off. But Babette's Feast shows a Catholic coming into a Protestant community, a refugee, who by sharing her art with them, shows them that the world is so much more full of God's glory than they ever had the imagination to apprehend. And so we see there that progression from right and wrong to good and evil to wisdom and folly. I think that chart needs more attention in Christian conversation. Matt, back to something you said. I wish I could invite pastors to my classroom. It's not so much that I want to change the way they preach. It's more that I want them to expand the spheres in which they move and the ways in which they experience things, because there are other kinds of conversation that are essential to Christian community. And it's easy for pastors to focus on what their job, which is usually, they're standing up here and the people are way out there. But we've got to break that down and sit in a circle as a community where it's not the authority figure and everyone else, but where we are in communion.
Mm-hmm.
I know we're coming up on time here. If there are if there's another question or two, that's fine with me. And then if anybody wants to recommend a film, I'm always up for that.
Jeffrey, where is the best place for people to find you?
You can find me at, brace yourself, jeffreyoverstreet.com. I don't know why it took me so many years to finally go out and get that thing. I was depending on all these other URLs, but finally, all of the stuff I've been publishing online since the late 90s is in one place at jeffreyoverstreet.com, and moving from one platform to another caused more trouble than I can begin to describe. So I have years of maintenance to do, but the ship is floating. It may not be sailing real well, but it's floating. So you can go to jeffreyoverstreet.com and browse through all kinds of poorly edited reviews and republications of things from my 10 years at Christianity Today or my several years at Image. So that's there. If you'd like to write to me, I have a specific email address for this kind of conversation, and it's overstreetreviews@gmail.com. And for all the questions we don't have time for, or for all the movies you want to recommend to me or ask me about, or if you want to see the syllabus from the class or something, I can send you a list of movies. Overstreetreviews@gmail.com. And then finally, I don't know how many of you know about a site called Letterboxd. If there are movie fans in the room, they probably know about this. Letterboxd, letter BOXD. I guess they left off the E to be cool. Letterboxd.com/ and then my account is at Joverstreet, JOVERSTREET, Joverstreet. That is where I keep a diary of all the films I'm seeing and make first impression comments about them. I'm obsessive about making lists for like every year or every genre or every decade or whatever. But it's just social media catnip for film lovers. And you can follow the people whose interests in film you find curious. They will follow you, and that's where a lot of great conversations start up. That's also how I meet a whole lot of people outside of the Christian conversation about film, where I meet a lot of my favorite film critics, and that has led to some really remarkable things. I'm so grateful that the foreword for this book was written by Matt Zoller Seitz. He's the editor-at-large at RogerEbert.com, and we struck up conversations in places like that. And it's been very meaningful, a very meaningful relationship for me. So I encourage you to check out what he has to say in this book as well. But those are three places we can connect. Sure. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. It's not hard to find me. For better or worse, I'm still on some of those. I did give up X for reasons I hope I don't need to explain.
One last question from Marianne. Hello, Marianne. How is a spiritual discipline cultivated that makes someone lose the fear that exposure to something unfamiliar might make them let their guard down around the fragile bubble of monoculture? That's such a small question.
Wow. Could you read that again? I mean, it sounds great, but I'm not sure I'm ready to answer this yet.
You can also see it on the side on the chat. It was sent over to everyone.
All right. Oh, wow. There it is. Okay. What's the spiritual difficulty? Thanks. Oh, yeah. How is the spiritual discipline cultivated? Well, unfortunately, it's going to be a messy process. I mean, we are all stormy souls, sometimes driven by curiosities that are healthier than others. Sometimes we are too quick to pull back from something that frightens us rather than investigate why it frightened us and what that might be doing in the movie. We also have to be merciful to each other because we're all on very different journeys. We've been hurt by different things. And so there's always a disclaimer with a film in my class that if this, because of something you've been through, is too much for you. We recently watched Women Talking, which is an extraordinary movie about Christian faith, but it's also about sexual abuse. And once in a while, there's a student that's like, I just can't go there. And I'm like, yeah, okay, thanks for letting me know. So it means we have to be merciful with each other, but we do need to be curious and courageous and take small steps. Try something you haven't tried before. And if you're like Eugene Peterson, who once said to me, can you just send me a list of things to try on Netflix? Because I get on there and I just scroll and I have no idea. That's where reading good criticism comes in. Start reading film criticism. Start talking to the people you know who love movies and have conversations about them obsessively, and just follow your curiosity. Move to the things that appeal to you. But once in a while, try something from a box you haven't tried before. I subscribe to the Criterion channel, and they always have these little mini film festivals on there where they dig up movies from the last 100 years that I've never even heard of, from different cultures or from different political movements or from different subgenres. And sometimes I'll just say, okay, here are the films on this list. And then like on Letterboxd or on Rotten Tomatoes, if I need to go there, I'll go and read a few of the reviews just to get a sense of what's going on here. Does this sound like it's rewarding? Does this sound like, I mean, you can go down the Philippians 4:8 list of if there's anything honorable, anything beautiful, anything worthy of praise. Does that sound like something I'd like to check out? I'd also encourage you, as you can, to watch these in community, because you're going to need that conversation afterwards. And it just transforms the experience. I am still devoted to going to movie theaters so that I can see films with some people in my community, just to have a sense of how it's playing with an audience. That always changes things for me. So for me, this book kind of narrates that journey. It started with Watership Down, which was, with Disney movies, I was used to movies about talking animals, but this one was different. It was not really for kids. It was a war story. It was about very heavy issues. Each little community of rabbits represented a different political model in the world. And that was hard work. But I was fascinated with it because it represented a bigger world than I had been living in. And so, joining the conversation, I think is essential. Because otherwise there's just so much. I mean, I used to look at the list of films that were opening in this country every week, and now it's such a fire hose of new stuff. I can't keep up with it. So I need to sort of look for those curators who, over time kind of impress me with their preferences and their discernment. I can also send you a list of critics I would encourage you to check out, and that I find quite knowledgeable, wise, and reliable. They won't jump on every bandwagon that makes it to the Oscar ceremony. They will not just look at, is this movie powerful, but that power, what is it in service of? Or one of my favorite questions is, what does this movie love? There are so many anti-war films that love war. Look at where the energy of the movie is going. There might be a lesson at the end, but where was more of the attention given? What is on screen the most? What is this movie really interested in? Those are questions that can help. That's a question that needs like a week-long seminar, but that's what I would throw out as sort of like a starting point. For me, it was Siskel and Ebert on television. I wasn't allowed to watch movies, but I was fascinated watching these two guys argue about the movies I wished I could see. And learning their different personalities and sensibilities. When I was finally free to see movies, I was going to go track down some of those they'd had really interesting conversations about.
This was lovely, lovely, lovely. And I will include any links. And also, Jeffrey, if you want to include anything, I'll put under the list, if there's suggestions, books, websites, anything, in addition to your own that you have, just emailed me those and I will put those on. At this point, thank you. And we're already 3 minutes over. Thank you, Jeffrey, very much. And for those of you who don't know, Jeffrey just came back from some presentations. So he has generously given more time than probably his health should have allowed for. Thank you very much, and everybody for being here, for the questions. This is always super fun. This is just glorious to be able to get to do this. Thank you, Jeffrey, again.
Hi, Ken Preeby. I don't know if there's anybody else here by their first names who I know. Jessica. Hi, Jessica. Marianne. Ken has written letterboxes for party people. Yes, it's the 24/7 movie party online. That's for sure. I just saw this horror movie called Obsession that my students are obsessed with. If any of you have thoughts about that one, write to me. I'm still processing it. And I don't recommend you all run out and see it. Let me put that out there too. You'll know if horror is your genre or not.
I heard something really interesting. This is he was giving a presentation. Craig Detweiler, I think.
Yeah.
He said something like, and this was at a packed Christian audience, and he said something like, do you know in the secular world what is the most spiritual form of movies? At which point everyone's really quiet. And he said, horror movies.
Yep. Yeah.
Specifically, think of like The Exorcist, at which point everyone is like, it was completely quiet. And then he went on to say why horror movies are deeply spiritual for a variety of reasons. And I was like,
Wow.
wow, that is really cool. I'm not a big horror person, but for some people,
There's a great book about that by Josh Larson, who's one of the co-hosts of the biggest movie podcast going, Film Spotting. Josh is a Christian, and he has a book called Fear Not that is about the deep value of horror films. So, well, some horror films. Um, I interviewed Scott Derrickson, who directed The Exorcism of Emily Rose, Sinister, and of course, Doctor Strange. I could go on a long tangent about what he's done to my life with students bringing me Doctor Strange toys or bringing me red capes to wear and show up for their graduation photo sessions. I had to write to Scott and go, you don't know what you've done to my professional life. But Scott used to teach at Biola. And now he's making The Black Phone 2 and movies like that. He has strong opinions about this. So I interviewed him for an issue of Image, an issue of Image, quite a few years ago now, where he preached a sermon on why he thinks horror is the most essential genre for Christian storytellers. That's going to be a
wow.
hard sell for some people, but he makes a good case for it.
Well, everybody,
All right.
again, thank you very much. Jeffrey, thank you so very much. And I hope your book goes
Oh,
really, really well. It's, again, it isn't just, like really, I was expecting reviews and I got the reviews, but then I also got a whole bunch more about life and it was, yeah, really cool. Plus the writing, which of course, I mean, you do that as well. The writing was very, very luscious. Yeah, it's very, very good.
well, I'll credit that to the former SBU MFA in Creative Writing program. Thank you. This has been a delight and an honor. And I'm just, my regret will be that I didn't get to have conversations with everybody here. These subjects need a significant amount of time if we're really going to tap into the important things. So thank you for being so generous as to give it that with your attention, everybody who's here, and Matthew for setting this up. I love these conversations. So I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you very much.